Harry's been brainwashed by Meghan. Who could disagree? Since they got married, he suddenly hates his country, hates his family, hates being a royal, and goes off for a very boring life in California. This is not a marriage, Paul. This is a hostage situation.
Aspect of it where they want to come here and I guess just sort of launch this new phase of their career. But at the same time, it will, of course, invite comparison to that trip back in 2018 when there were thousands of people out to meet them. And now you're looking at situations where they're selling tickets for events. So Meghan will be doing this.
What was meant to be a polished, carefully managed royal tour in Australia for Meghan Markle quickly took on a very different tone when reports of internal emails began to circulate, bringing attention to details that had never been intended for public view and raising questions about how closely the private reality matched the image being presented on the surface. According to those familiar with the situation, the contrast between what was being communicated behind closed doors and what the public was seeing appeared significant, not just in tone, but in overall atmosphere, suggesting that the narrative unfolding externally may not have reflected the full picture. And this is where the situation becomes more complex, because the content and tone of those reported messages didn't just pass unnoticed. They prompted reactions, sparked discussion, and led many to question what was really happening during that tour. Was it simply the pressure and intensity that comes with high-profile public appearances? Or was there something deeper at play? Something that was never expected to be seen outside of those internal exchanges?
You know, I just think this is another Montecito money grab. As you rightly mentioned, I mean, the Netflix deal has been cancelled. These two just won't give up and they're just desperate for this relevance. They've got relevance deprivation.
What makes it even more striking is how quickly everything began to shift once those details surfaced. The timing, the reactions, and the noticeable silence from certain sides all contributing to a situation that felt increasingly difficult to ignore. There's a growing sense that something about the situation feels too deliberate to simply dismiss, especially as more people begin to revisit moments from that tour with a different perspective, rewatching clips, going back over statements, and noticing details that didn't stand out at the time but now seem harder to overlook. According to those discussions, the picture that's beginning to form isn't as straightforward as it once appeared, and if the reported emails reflect the situation accurately, this may not be a minor issue, but something that could reshape how that entire Australia visit is understood moving forward. What makes it even more impactful is how perception can shift once new context is introduced, because after seeing those details, it becomes difficult to interpret earlier moments in exactly the same way.
Then came a sudden development that seemed to change the tone almost overnight.
Reports began to circulate suggesting that a private email connected to Meghan Markle's Australia trip had somehow entered the public conversation, bringing with it references to behind-the-scenes planning tied to one of the events during that visit, information that was never intended to be shared beyond internal communication. Unlike general speculation, this wasn't described as a vague claim, but as something more specific, a message that, if accurate, could offer insight into how certain moments were being coordinated away from public view. And according to those same sources, the concern isn't limited to a single email, but to what it might represent, because once one internal message becomes visible, it often raises a larger question about whether additional details could follow. As soon as that first detail surfaced, the conversation began to shift in a way that felt difficult to control, because once people start asking what else might be hidden, the focus rarely stays on the original narrative, and the timing, according to many observers, could not have been worse.
So interesting. I was actually on that royal tour back in 2018, and the optics for us at that time, because we didn't know what was going on behind the scenes, and to talk about Bauer's book, I mean, these are the claims that he's talking about. It's the lead up to Megxit. But for us as journalists and members of the public seeing that tour, it looked like a huge success. There were thousands of people greeting them everywhere. They were so popular at that time. It felt like this really huge moment for them and a really exciting moment for the monarchy. Now, as we know, that wasn't how they felt about it behind the scenes. And, 18 months later, they had left the royal family.
The Australia tour had been positioned as an opportunity for Meghan Markle to strengthen her public image and highlight ongoing projects. But instead of reinforcing that message, attention quickly moved in another direction, raising questions about transparency, the nature of certain events, and whether everything was being presented as clearly as it appeared on the surface. What had been planned as a positive spotlight moment began to feel more uncertain, with discussions no longer centered on initiatives or appearances, but on how those moments were being organized behind the scenes. To understand why the reaction intensified so quickly, many pointed back to the content of the reported email itself. According to coverage referenced by Sky News Australia, the message was described as part of internal communication linked to preparations for a women-focused retreat in Australia, an event connected to Meghan's scheduled appearance during the visit. That detail alone prompted further attention, as people began examining how the event was structured and what role it was intended to play within the broader tour. What made the situation more significant was how quickly the message moved beyond its original context, as internal planning notes, including scheduling details and logistical arrangements, reportedly began circulating publicly, even though they were never intended to be seen outside of those directly involved. And once those kinds of details become visible, they tend to raise immediate questions, not just about the event itself, but about the broader approach behind how it was presented. Once details like that begin to circulate, the pace of the conversation tends to accelerate almost immediately, with online discussions moving quickly from simple curiosity into broader speculation, especially when the information appears to come from internal sources rather than public statements. While leaks are not uncommon when it comes to high-profile figures, this particular situation drew more focused attention, largely because it didn't just hint at behind-the-scenes activity, but appeared to reveal specific planning details that encouraged people to look more closely at the event itself.
Well, no, what remains to be seen. I can't wait to see how they go here in Australia. The Duke and Duchess of Privacy on another privacy.
What began as interest in the reported email soon expanded into a deeper examination of the gathering connected to Meghan Markle's visit, which had been presented as a luxury retreat centered on themes such as empowerment, networking, and personal growth, an idea that, on the surface, aligned with many of the initiatives she has been associated with. However, as more information was discussed, another aspect quickly became a focal point: the reported cost of attending. According to those same discussions, ticket prices for the retreat were said to reach into the thousands of Australian dollars, a detail that immediately sparked debate, not necessarily about the concept itself, but about how it was being positioned. Some supporters argued that pricing at that level can be expected for exclusive experiences, particularly when they involve high-profile participants, curated environments, and limited access, framing it as part of a premium offering rather than something intended for a broad audience. At the same time, critics began to raise a different perspective, questioning whether the reality of the event truly aligned with the message being presented. And for many observers, that led to a broader and more uncomfortable question about accessibility and intent. If the retreat connected to Meghan Markle was positioned around empowerment and opportunity, some wondered why the experience appeared to be limited to a relatively small group of high-paying attendees, creating a contrast that quickly became a focal point in online discussions.
Left the royal family 6 years ago, and we have seen even just the fact their Netflix deal was downgraded, although that's not how they have said it, but it is. These sorts of things, I mean, their value has changed, and that is a very expensive ticket. I will say one thing on a personal note: when I saw that $3,000 doesn't get you an individual photo with Meghan, I thought, like, I'd be pretty upset. It's like, if I'm going to pay that kind of money to attend this event, presumably just to hear her speak and be in proximity to her, I want a selfie with this.
That single question was enough to ignite widespread debate, with comment sections filling rapidly and opinions dividing across social platforms, as supporters and critics approached the situation from very different angles. And just as the conversation was already gaining momentum, another layer of curiosity began to take shape, shifting attention from the event itself to the circumstances surrounding the leak.
A new question started appearing repeatedly. Was the release of that email purely accidental, or could it have been intentional?
There is no confirmed answer to that, but the possibility alone has kept the discussion active because in the world of high-profile public figures, even a small element of uncertainty can quickly expand into a much larger narrative. According to some perspectives, the controversy has the potential to overshadow the original purpose of the trip entirely, moving focus away from the intended message and toward the questions now surrounding it. Others see the situation in a different light, suggesting that it reflects a pattern that has followed Meghan Markle for some time.
Harry, let's go there. All right, so there is a brand new book which is all in and around Meghan Markle being able to brainwash Harry.
The gap between public messaging and how that messaging is ultimately perceived. Supporters continue to highlight her advocacy work, her involvement in social causes, and the broader themes she has consistently promoted, while critics are focusing on what they view as a contrast between those values and the more exclusive, high-end image associated with events like this. That tension is exactly what's driving the current level of attention, because it places two different narratives side by side, creating a space where interpretation becomes central to the discussion. For many observing from the outside, this moment feels like a rare look behind the curtain, where internal planning details, usually kept private, have surfaced publicly, prompting curiosity about how these types of events are actually organized and presented. And while the reported email plays a significant role in shaping the conversation, it is only one part of why this story continues to spread, as the broader context and ongoing discussion are what keep it moving. The speed at which this story has developed is part of what makes it stand out, but the location adds another layer entirely, because Australia is not just another stop on the map, it carries real significance in the story of Meghan Markle and Prince Harry.
I will tell you that lots of Australian viewers of the Mark Dolan show don't want to see Harry and Meghan. The reason why it went down well in 2018, Paul, is because the Australian public didn't know Meghan Markle very well. Well, they know her now. And what do they know her to be? A gold-digging grifter.
Back in 2018, shortly after their wedding, the couple's tour of Australia was widely seen as a major success, drawing large crowds, generating overwhelmingly positive media coverage, and creating a sense of momentum that many described as one of the strongest moments in their public life together. At that time, the energy surrounding them felt unmistakably positive, with public interest high and engagement coming from every direction, reinforcing their position on the global stage. Now, looking at the present, the contrast is difficult to ignore. Since stepping back from royal duties and relocating to the United States, their direction has shifted toward independent projects, media ventures, and a different kind of public presence, one that has brought both significant attention and, at times, equally strong debate. Because of that mixed trajectory, every new appearance is now viewed through a more critical lens, with audiences paying closer attention to details, context, and consistency, which is exactly why this particular moment feels more intense than it might have under different circumstances. Everything seems to circle back to a place where that connection once felt strongest, which is exactly why this moment carries so much weight. Because if this Australia visit was intended to represent a new chapter for Meghan Markle, the emergence of that reported email may have already shifted the narrative in a completely different direction. Instead of anticipation building around the trip, the conversation online has become increasingly focused on questions, not just about the event itself, but about transparency, intent, and whether this situation could continue to develop into something larger. What appears to be creating even more concern, according to insiders, is not limited to what has already surfaced, but to the possibility that additional details could follow, because once internal communication begins to appear publicly, it often raises expectations that more could emerge, potentially accelerating the situation further.
Expert Richard Kay has claimed Princess Diana was preparing her younger son, Prince Harry, to be the king, preferencing him over the shy Prince William, who Diana felt wasn't interested in the top job. Kinsey, look, we have a lot of respect for the late Princess Diana in this country, but man, did she get that one wrong.
Yeah, I'm allergic to this story. Are we really expected to trust her judgment? Diana died in the backseat of a car with a guy who was engaged to another woman. Another one of her ex-lovers wrote a tell-all about her titled Princess in Love, airing all of their dirty laundry. Prince Charles, period. I mean, I don't even have to go into that one. Her poor judgment in men should be studied in classrooms. Harry is right where he should be, taking pictures with paying customers like he's Mickey Mouse.
As the story continued to spread across social media and news platforms, attention didn't remain fixed solely on the leak, but also began to center on the event connected to it, the exclusive women's retreat that Meghan is expected to attend. The retreat is being presented as a high-end experience focused on empowerment, networking, and personal growth, a concept that, on the surface, aligns with many of the themes she has previously supported. However, the reported cost quickly became part of the discussion, with claims that ticket prices could reach into the thousands of Australian dollars, a detail that immediately intensified reactions and added another layer to an already growing debate. Reactions began spreading quickly, filling timelines with a mix of support, skepticism, and intense debate, as people responded not just to the reported details, but to what those details seemed to represent on a larger level. Some questioned whether the retreat truly aligned with the idea of empowerment being promoted, while others focused on accessibility, asking how inclusive an experience can be if the cost places it out of reach for most people.
Also, allegations of a row between Meghan and William, with Meghan back in the day when she was in the royal family. She had a fight with William reportedly, and she said, "William, get your finger out of my face." It seems like William had the measure of this woman long before the rest of us.
Across social platforms, those questions turned into viral commentary, with users pointing out what they saw as a disconnect between messaging and reality, highlighting the contrast between themes like inclusivity and the exclusivity suggested by the reported pricing. Statements reflecting that perspective circulated widely, emphasizing how quickly public perception can shift when expectations and presentation appear to move in different directions.
And that growing gap between how the event is being framed and how it is being received is exactly what continues to drive attention around this situation.
For many observers, it feels like part of a broader pattern associated with Meghan Markle, where high-profile initiatives generate both visibility and debate at the same time. Supporters argue that events of this scale are designed to attract influential audiences, create visibility, and support larger goals that extend beyond the event itself. Critics, however, approach it from a different perspective, focusing on whether the structure and presentation align with the values being communicated. And that difference in interpretation is what keeps the conversation moving forward. The contrast between luxury pricing and the idea of broad empowerment continued to drive the discussion, with many pointing out that exclusive access and high costs don't easily align with messaging centered around opportunity for everyone, and that tension is exactly what has kept the story trending across multiple platforms. At the same time, the conversation has moved beyond pricing alone, as additional reports suggested that the leaked email may have included further behind-the-scenes details, such as scheduling notes, travel coordination, and references to meetings planned during the trip for Meghan Markle. On their own, those kinds of details are not unusual for a high-profile visit.
So it is now 7 years on, they're going to be coming back to Australia, but the landscape for them could not be more different. So as I mentioned earlier, I have had sources telling me that it's about coming back here for, there's two main reasons that were mentioned to me. And one is Harry's connection with friends that he's cultivated over the years in Australia. He has a lot of close friends here, particularly in the military community. Then he'll be looking to doing some work in that space while he's here. And also for Meghan, as I said, she's at a very important point in this lifestyle company that she's running and trying to build this empire, because she has now split with.
As events of that scale typically involve extensive planning and coordination. But once private information enters the public space, the context changes entirely, opening the door for interpretation, speculation, and increased scrutiny. Media outlets responded quickly, expanding the coverage beyond the initial leak and examining what those details might suggest about how the trip was being organized, including the structure of appearances, the priorities behind certain engagements, and the overall strategy guiding the visit. Some reports focused primarily on presenting the information as it was described, while others adopted a more critical tone, framing the situation as part of a larger discussion about transparency and the management of public image. And as that coverage spread across different countries and platforms, the conversation continued to grow, moving from a single leaked message into a broader analysis of how high-profile appearances are planned and perceived when internal details become visible. Online reactions are clearly divided, reflecting two very different ways of interpreting the situation, with some continuing to support Meghan Markle and pointing to her past work, advocacy, and the causes she has aligned herself with, while others remain more skeptical, viewing each new detail that emerges as something that reinforces their concerns rather than easing them. What makes this even more significant is that the current reaction did not begin with the reported email, but is part of a longer pattern that has followed her public life since stepping away from royal duties, where interviews, media projects, and speaking engagements have consistently generated both strong support and equally strong criticism. With this latest development now circulating widely, the narrative appears to be shifting once again, bringing a recurring question back into focus: whether any public appearance involving her can take place without becoming the subject of intense scrutiny.
Tom Bower is one of the most feared biographers in the world, and he's gone after Richard Branson, Tony Blair, and of course Meghan Markle. None of those people have successfully sued him because, like you, Paul, he's an elite level journalist who checks his facts. And don't forget that these publishing companies are not stupid. They're not going to publish things that aren't true because they know they'll wind up in court.
At the moment, it seems that nearly every move is being analyzed, discussed, and interpreted from multiple angles, creating a cycle where attention builds regardless of the original intention behind the appearance. The timing only adds to that intensity because the Australia trip was meant to highlight key engagements, promote ongoing initiatives, and reinforce her global presence. Yet instead of those goals remaining central, the conversation has begun to move in a different direction, with the original purpose of the visit gradually being overshadowed by the questions now surrounding it. At this point, the reported email has become the central focus of the entire situation, shifting attention away from what the trip was originally meant to highlight and placing the spotlight firmly on the questions now surrounding it. Headlines have followed that shift, moving away from planned appearances and initiatives toward the implications of what may have been revealed, while social media continues to amplify every angle of the discussion, with reactions spreading rapidly across platforms. Some voices have framed the situation as a contrast between exclusivity and empowerment, while others are focused on the possibility of additional details emerging, asking how much more could surface if further internal information becomes public. Comments reflecting frustration and skepticism have added to the intensity of the conversation, illustrating just how divided public opinion has become, where even something as routine as a planning email can evolve into a much larger debate.
It's about a year since With Love Meghan launched, and we had, 2 seasons of that and a one-off holiday special, and that's no more. So now really all of her eggs are very literally in the as-ever basket, especially now she's going it alone without Netflix. So this all kind of feeds into this this image and this career she's trying to build for herself, the sort of a Gwyneth Paltrow type or just getting out there, and it's about lifestyle and self-help and all of those sorts of things. And it does feed in.
When it is viewed through the lens of constant public scrutiny. And this moment does not exist in isolation, but instead connects to a broader narrative involving Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, particularly since their decision to step back from royal duties in 2020. Since then, their path has included a mix of media projects, public appearances, and independent ventures, all unfolding under continuous attention, where some decisions have been met with strong support and widespread recognition, while others have generated equally strong debate. That history is exactly what gives the situation more weight, because when a public figure has already experienced mixed reactions over time, even smaller details can take on greater significance and quickly expand into larger debates. For Meghan Markle, the combination of visibility, exclusivity, and global attention means that moments which might otherwise pass unnoticed are now being examined far more closely, especially when they connect to broader themes that people have been discussing for years. As the trip approaches, insiders suggest that there is an awareness behind the scenes of just how intense that scrutiny has become, with particular concern not only about what has already surfaced, but about how easily details can be interpreted in different ways once they enter the public space. The possibility that additional private information could emerge at any time adds another layer of uncertainty, because if more internal details were to become public, the conversation could shift even further away from the intended purpose of the visit. At the same time, there are indications, according to those reports, that aspects of the trip may be quietly reassessed, potentially involving adjustments to scheduling, guest arrangements.
Well, thankfully, Meghan Markle grew up in Hollywood, where hiring extras or seat fillers is a go-to to avoid looking like you failed miserably at something. So who knows? There might not be an empty seat in the house. But honestly, who would pay $3,000 for quotes like, "You have to anchor yourself in your own knowing," or "My bacon brings all the boys to the yard"? I would pay $3,000 for a grifter's guide to making millions off of Netflix and Spotify while doing the bare minimum. I would definitely pay $3,000 for a lesson on how to trap a prince. But that's not what these ladies will get. They'll get Meghan transferring one bag of pretzels into another bag of...
Or how certain events are presented, all with the aim of managing the situation as it continues to develop. And that naturally leads to a larger question, one that is now being asked more frequently as the story unfolds. How much can be controlled once the narrative has already begun to move in a different direction? At this stage, the question that continues to come up is whether everything will move forward exactly as planned, or whether adjustments will quietly be made in response to the growing attention. Because with so many elements already in motion, the situation has reached a point where certainty is difficult to predict. That uncertainty is precisely what is keeping people engaged, as each new update, every reaction online, and even unconfirmed rumors begin to form part of an evolving narrative that feels like it is unfolding in real time. Given the history surrounding Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, where major moments have consistently drawn global attention, the level of focus now feels even more intense, with audiences watching closely to see how this situation develops. As the timeline moves closer to the trip itself, anticipation continues to build, with attention centered on what happens next, whether additional details will emerge, whether plans will shift, or whether everything will proceed without visible changes. At the moment, three key elements appear to be shaping the conversation: the luxury retreat, the reported email, and the ongoing wave of reactions across social media, all of which continue to feed into a story that is expanding beyond its original scope. And as that story grows, it is gradually becoming something larger than a single event, evolving into a broader discussion about public image, perception, and what this moment could mean for Meghan's future appearances and projects moving forward. At this point, the situation has clearly moved beyond a single event and into something much broader, a reflection of how every move is examined, how narratives take shape across media platforms, and how difficult it can be to maintain a carefully managed public image under constant global attention. In today's environment, even the smallest detail can escalate almost instantly as information spreads within seconds and is picked apart, analyzed, and debated by millions across multiple platforms, turning what might have been a minor issue into a widespread conversation.
Australia has tackled illegal immigration very successfully. And I think given the fact that Harry and Meghan are on their way, I think it's time to reactivate Operation Sovereign Borders.
Now, the focus is beginning to settle on what many see as the most important element of all, the Australia trip itself, and why it carries so much significance in the context of everything that has been unfolding. With the reported email still dominating headlines and the retreat continuing to generate strong reactions online, attention is increasingly centered on Meghan Markle's upcoming visit, which is no longer being viewed as just another appearance. Instead, it is being seen as a moment that holds real weight for both Meghan and Prince Harry, particularly because it was originally intended to highlight key initiatives, promote the retreat, and reinforce their presence on the global stage. However, with the surrounding conversation shifting in the way it has, the tone of the trip now feels different, and the level of pressure attached to it has increased, especially for those watching closely to see how everything unfolds from this point forward. This visit also carries a sense of returning to a place that once played a major role in shaping the public image of Meghan Markle and Prince Harry during their time as senior royals. Back in 2018, their tour of Australia was widely viewed as a defining moment, drawing large crowds, generating strong media coverage, and creating a wave of positive attention that positioned them at the center of global interest. Because of that history, expectations for this new visit were already elevated, with plans built around carefully coordinated appearances, exclusive gatherings, and moments designed to highlight Meghan's initiatives and reinforce her public presence. However, the situation shifted rapidly once the reported email entered the conversation, changing the focus almost overnight. Instead of attention remaining on the purpose of the trip or the retreat itself, the discussion began to center on how those plans were revealed, how they were being interpreted, and what the potential impact might be. Critics responded quickly, particularly across social media, where conversations intensified around the pricing of the retreat and the perceived contrast between its messaging and the level of exclusivity it appeared to represent, adding further momentum to a debate that continues to grow. And once that shift in attention began, it accelerated quickly, with memes spreading, viral posts gaining traction, and commentary videos appearing almost instantly, illustrating just how rapidly public perception can change when a single unexpected detail enters the conversation. What had been framed one way only hours earlier suddenly took on a different meaning as the narrative adjusted in real time, driven not by official messaging, but by how audiences interpreted what they were seeing and hearing. Some observers now suggest that the reported leak has the potential to overshadow the retreat itself, not because of its original purpose, but because of the timing and the questions it has introduced into the wider discussion. Instead of conversations centered on empowerment and networking, attention has shifted toward themes such as transparency, privilege, and access, with people asking who these experiences are truly designed for and how they are being presented behind the scenes. There are also indications, according to those same reports, that the situation is being taken seriously by those involved, with Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's team said to be reviewing plans carefully, potentially considering adjustments to schedules, guest lists, or how certain aspects of the trip are handled. The intention behind those steps appears to be clear: to prevent the situation from escalating further and to manage the direction of the conversation as it continues to develop. However, whether those adjustments will have the desired effect remains uncertain. And it is that uncertainty, more than anything else, that continues to keep the story active and sustain the level of attention surrounding it. When you step back and look at the bigger picture, this situation highlights a challenge that seems to follow them consistently: the gap between intention and public perception in a media environment that moves faster than ever. Even the most carefully planned events can quickly shift direction once private details become public, because the moment that happens, the focus often moves away from the original message and toward how those details are interpreted. For Meghan Markle, much of her public image has been built around themes like advocacy, empowerment, and charitable work, values that have been reflected across her speeches, appearances, and projects over time. However, with that level of visibility, every new move, especially something as high-profile as this trip, is now subject to intense scrutiny, where even smaller elements, such as a reported email or the pricing of a single event, can quickly dominate the conversation. As a result, attention can shift rapidly, pulling focus away from broader goals and towards specific details that take on a life of their own once they enter public discussion. Media commentary has also started linking this moment to the wider trajectory of Prince Harry and Meghan's post-royal path, including their involvement in major media projects, public appearances, and speaking engagements. From one perspective, this reflects their continued influence and visibility, while from another, critics argue that their position often places them in a space where attention and controversy exist side by side, ensuring that each new development is examined closely and discussed from multiple angles. Because of everything that has come before, this Australia trip is now being viewed as something far more significant than just another scheduled appearance, with many commentators describing it as the latest chapter in an ongoing narrative where every element is examined closely. From the messaging and the setting to the guest list and even the smallest planning decisions, nothing seems to escape attention, especially in a situation where context and perception are playing such a central role. At the same time, there is a strong response from supporters who argue that events like this retreat can serve a meaningful purpose, helping to raise awareness, support initiatives, and bring visibility to causes that might otherwise struggle to reach a wider audience.
From that perspective, the involvement of high-profile figures like Meghan Markle is seen as a way to amplify important conversations on a global scale, making visibility itself a key part of the impact. But that is exactly where the divide becomes clear. On one side, there are those who see intention, strategy, and purpose behind these choices, while on the other, critics focus on what they perceive as a gap between the message being presented and the way the events themselves are structured. That tension has been part of the broader conversation surrounding Meghan for years, but the emergence of this email situation has brought it back into focus in a much more immediate and visible way. And adding to the intensity is another important factor, the international spotlight, because Australia is not just any location, but one with a long-standing connection to royal visits, where appearances tend to attract significant attention and public interest from the moment they are announced. The level of attention surrounding Meghan Markle and Prince Harry right now reflects just how significant this trip has become, because it is no longer viewed as a simple appearance, but as a closely observed public moment in a country where their 2018 visit once generated overwhelming excitement. Back then, large crowds gathered, media coverage was highly positive, and the overall reception helped shape one of the strongest periods of their early public image, setting a high benchmark for any return. Now, however, the focus has shifted in a very different direction. Instead of attention remaining on the retreat or the initiatives connected to it, the conversation has moved toward the reported email and the reaction it has triggered, with many observers noting that while some supporters may still concentrate on the event itself, much of the public attention is now centered on the leak and its potential implications. Each new post, reaction, and headline continues to add another layer to the story, and within today's fast-moving media cycle, that accumulation can quickly intensify the overall narrative. At the same time, there are indications that the situation is being closely monitored behind the scenes, with reports suggesting that Meghan is aware of how sensitive the moment has become, particularly given how quickly private details can enter the public domain and reshape perception. According to those same accounts, that awareness is already influencing how her team is approaching the trip, with planning, communication, and logistical details being reviewed carefully, as efforts are made to ensure that everything moving forward is handled with greater precision. As the timeline moves closer, the focus appears to be shifting toward one clear objective: to reduce confusion and bring attention back to the original purpose of the visit, but the level of pressure surrounding it continues to build. Since the reported email surfaced, every detail involving Meghan Markle and Prince Harry has been observed more closely, with questions forming around how they will present themselves, whether the retreat will be adjusted in response to the reaction, and how the overall message will be communicated moving forward. Even those who might not usually follow these developments are being drawn into the discussion, as conversations online continue to expand, touching on themes such as intent, image, and authenticity, all of which are now part of a much larger debate. With each new update, the attention intensifies, and one central question continues to stand out: whether this situation will be managed smoothly, or whether the reported leak will end up shaping how the entire trip is remembered. That uncertainty is what keeps the story active, because in today's media landscape, even a single detail can evolve into a major headline almost instantly, shifting the narrative in ways that are difficult to predict. And right now, that sense of unpredictability is exactly what defines this moment, creating a situation that feels high stakes, closely watched, and still very much in motion as people continue to follow what happens next. At this point, everything has come together at once: the reported leak, the luxury retreat, the non-stop online reactions, and the history that continues to follow Meghan Markle and Prince Harry wherever they go. What was supposed to be just another visit has now turned into something much bigger, a real-time test of public perception, control, and how quickly a narrative can shift when even one detail breaks into the spotlight. And that's what makes this moment so unpredictable, because it's no longer just about the trip itself, it's about how it will be remembered once everything plays out. So now the question is simple, but the answer isn't. Is this situation being blown out of proportion, or is there something deeper happening behind the scenes that hasn't fully surfaced yet? And when the trip finally unfolds, will everything go according to plan, or are last-minute changes already shaping what we're about to see? And if you want more breakdowns like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because this is Palace Loop, and there's always more beneath the surface.